I'm in Max.
You are listening to Happy Jack's RPG Podcast.
I'm in Max.
Pursuing the RPG hobby with reckless abandon.
Why, hello, and welcome to Season 28, Episode 10 of Happy Jack's RPG Podcast. My name is Stu.
This is Tappy.
And boy, have I been having computer problems. In this episode of Happy Jack's RPG Podcast, Corbin writes in about physics in fantastic RPG settings, and Dirk writes in about leading questions and when they're railroady. But first, if you'd like to email us, you can email us at happyjacksrpg@gmail.com. That's happyjacksrpg@gmail.com. We also do the show live. It's on Saturday at 10 a.m., 10:26 a.m. Pacific time. Maybe earlier than that if the computer will work. Everything fucked up this time. Everything fucked up. I plugged in, I needed to use the adapter for my iPad that I use for the soundboard. When I plugged it back in, because I have to use an adapter, because if I just plug it directly into the because I have USB ports on the power strip, those make a hum, so I have to plug it into an adapter. And when I plugged it back in, the screen, like the screen circuits in the iPad were fritzing out, and I was seeing like ghosty images in it, which has never happened before. And then my laptop is still not, even though I started restarting it over 45 minutes ago, it's still giving me that little circle like it's still doing shit in the background. Maybe it's an update going in. And then the actual streaming computer fucked up as well. All three. It was the trifecta of fuck-ups. I love them. So we're back on Saturdays for a while because I have been having work, sometimes having to work late. So this is much easier because I don't work on Saturdays. So I'll read the first email.
All right.
Physics in RPGs from Corbin. Dear Jackers, both happy and otherwise. Corbin Trois here.
I
Hailing.
like what you've done there.
Yeah, right?
Yeah.
That Trois Corbins. I can't remember how that song goes now.
As I was walking
That's it.
the lane,
I heard Trois Corbins back in the main, and they unto the other did say, oh, where shall we do? Hailing from a
Great tune.
But watch and YouTube will ding us because that's copyright. No, it's not. Hailing from Isolation Station 24601 and hoping you're all doing well during the lockdown era.
Wow, and there's a musical reference there too.
What's the musical reference?
24601.
What's that?
Les Mis. That's Jean Valjean's number.
Oh, it is. Oh, I don't even remember. Is there a song of it?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm in the process of prepping an online game to run for my temporarily online group once the current campaign ends in a few months, and have noticed a growing trend among the other players that I find a little concerning. Anytime the current GM, which is not him apparently, gets a bit creative with events, the players grind the game to a halt to discuss how the physics of the situation work in the real world. For example, we're having a battle on an asylum rooftop during a violent storm, for which the GM provided some gimmicks around being struck by lightning. Basically, there was a chance someone would get hit by lightning at the beginning of each round, and if they were holding something metal, such as a weapon, an uncommon thing in the setting, they would take extra damage. Instead of nodding and going along with the theatrics, the rules lawyer piped up to talk about how, actually, depending on the metal, a weapon might be a terrible conductor. There aren't many metals that are terrible conductors.
Yeah, I can't think of
Steel's fine.
any. I mean, aluminum.
Aluminum is a great
copper's-
conductor.
Copper's great.
And I mean, the big bars that go into industrial buildings are made out of aluminum. So it must work fine. I don't know what kind of metal they're talking about. Lead? But I think lead probably... No, lead's a good conductor. They use it to solder joints on circuit boards. I can't think of a metal that's not a good conductor.
Yeah.
Is that
I can't either.
Is that maybe one of the defining attributes of a metal, that it is a conductor?
It might just be a secondary thing from how metals are put together.
Could
Not
be.
entirely sure.
I don't know.
We have the internet.
Right. How the metal as a weapon might be a terrible conductor, which led a few others to go on how lightning rods work and so on, until the GM just cut out the extra damage. Later, when an ally was dangling from the top of an elevator shaft and the villain pulled off a move that caused our friend to drop 40 to 50 feet down into the destroyed elevator, everyone jumped in again about terminal velocity and how it should totally be how he should totally be able to survive, because he may be kind of fucked up, but it's mostly about how you land more than what you land on. Not at terminal velocity. Terminal velocity is really fucking fast.
Yeah.
Isn't it? Don't people isn't that why people jump off of buildings? When they to hurt themselves?
You can land in such a way at terminal velocity where you don't die, but it's relatively rare.
Right. I remember there was a weird story that took place in the 60s or 70s where a Russian pilot ejected at 20 or 30,000 feet and happened to land in such a way, because his parachute failed, and he landed in such a way that he survived. But that's one guy.
Yeah. Now, squirrels can fall from any height and not die. Because with their tail and their arms out and stuff like that, their terminal velocity is lower than what will kill them.
Oh, because they can create a whole bunch of drag.
Yeah.
With all that stuff. It's like the squirrel suits that people use when they do that free jumping shit.
Oh man, that'd be so cool.
It would, except for that. God, I can't remember what the statistic was, but they talked about what the average lifespan of people that do that is. It's low.
28.
It's low. It's one of those hobbies. It's the likelihood of you dying from that goes up almost exponentially. I mean, I don't think in 50 years, because they've only been base jumping like that with those suits for maybe 20 years, 25 years, maybe
Something
30.
like that.
So I bet 20, 30 years from now, there aren't going to be any 80-year-old base jumpers.
No.
I think statistically there just won't be.
That institutional memory just goes away.
Right.
So apparently, I just looked it up. There are no non-conductive metals.
Okay. All right.
And,
so all metals are conductive, right?
Yeah. Apparently, tungsten and bismuth are metals which are poor conductors of electricity. Bismuth, which is not a particularly good metal for weapons, and tungsten, where in a setting where weapons are very uncommon, seems like it would be relatively difficult to work into a weapon.
Yes.
So there you go.
All right. He may be so terminal velocity. He may be kind of fucked up, but it's mostly about how you land more than what you land on. Mm-hmm. The GM acquiesced and the ally survived, doing pretty okay despite falling about 45 feet into a ruined elevator.
You would die.
So how about, at the bottom of the elevator there happens to be this, haystack. Well, you might live. But all of the workings, because the top of an elevator is a messy fucking thing. There's pulleys and wheels and all kinds of stuff, because all the metal is jagged because no one's supposed to be there anyway, so they don't have to worry about that.
And falling on non-flat surfaces, especially made out of metal, tends to be very difficult for the person falling.
It's very knifey.
Yeah, it's quite knifey.
All right. This is a game where one character can literally open himself up and consume another person whole. Another is the Queen of Heaven, and my character can transform into a shadowy avatar of bestial rage.
Wow, this sounds like my kind of game.
Right, except they're using physics arguments about why they shouldn't take damage.
Yeah.
My question is this. How do I mitigate this sort of tangent about real life versus the in-game universe? I don't want to lord over the players going, do not question my authority, anytime they have a concern about something, if it doesn't make any sense. But I also don't want them dragging this sort of devout adherence to the laws of physics, which I think we just disproved, that they are not based on laws of physics, into a fictional theatrical world. Do you have any experience with players who fight so hard for this level of realism in the game? How do you manage them? Thanks to all, and all the best to you in your isolation stations, Corbin. First off, these are munchkins. I'm trying to always look at people's arguments in the most charitable way. It's one of the things I'm trying to do. However, this makes it very difficult because I am not seeing a good faith attempt to create realism. I'm seeing we want to win and not have repercussions when things don't go the way we want them to go.
Things must always go our way.
Right. Which is the most boring goddamn game in the world, right? I mean, if every victory you had happened without any chance or of bad die rolls or possibly being injured, because at one point he's talking about killing them, but at another point it's just extra damage. I don't know what system they're playing, but in some systems extra damage can kill you, but in a lot of them, no, not really. So I don't know, but it seems to me that the arguments they're making aren't arguments based on their understanding of physics. It's their arguments based on their understanding that they don't want their characters to take damage. Mm-hmm. That's what it seems like to me. So I personally think this is a bad faith argument, and it seems like it on the surface that it is. Maybe no one's ever taken a physics class and doesn't know that metals are conductive. I'm assuming that they're made out of metal. They're not made out of wood. Wood doesn't conduct. Ice, I don't know if ice conducts. It might. Maybe it's an ice weapon. Maybe it's like drits.
However, even wood, trees get hit by lightning all the time.
That's
So
true.
if they're the highest thing and they have like a wooden staff, that very well could do the thing.
That's true. That's true. And lightning, it's from my understanding, it gets attracted to lightning rods and shit like that, to metallic objects. But it's really looking at the difference in I don't even know what they call it, but it's like if the amount of positive and negative ions,
the charge,
whatever the charge is, and it's trying to equalize it, right? Isn't that basically what's happening?
Yeah.
So you don't control how many positive or negative ions you have or whatever. Unless that's your superpower.
One's the queen of heaven, so maybe they can,
I stand corrected.
But again, that's not physics.
Right.
And I have never had a player like this. And that's good because, number one, my stories rely on the players fucking up. Because that's how I, jump off to what's actually happening.
Right.
I like to set them in some situation where they have to act, and then how they succeed, but also how they fail, determines the direction that whatever bad thing is happening goes. So if somebody just never wanted bad things to happen, they're going to have a bad time in my game.
Right.
And yeah, none of these arguments are actually good arguments.
No. And I don't think the players, I don't know, is this like a cheat code thing maybe? Did you ever notice when you play a video game and then it's like when you use cheat codes, you kind of break through this barrier and suddenly the game's not fun anymore? You know what I mean?
Well, and also you can't not do it.
Right.
Like, I can't put any cheat codes. I can't use... If I use mods, I have to be like, okay, this is now going to be insane. So I have to play the game first, then use the mods, because I'm going to use all of the stuff, even if it's broken, because it's there.
Right.
And so maybe that's what it's like, too. Like, this person knows they can do it.
Maybe. I don't know. It just doesn't seem like... Because like, when I used to remember Doom... I don't know if you remember Doom.
Oh, of course I remember Doom. I remember Castle Wolfenstein 2.
The AFJK, I don't remember what it was, but there was this cheat code you put in that gave you like 50 lives, and you could get any gun you want. And it gives you all the weapons. So you get the BFG 9000, and you go on and boosh, boosh, you start blowing people up left and right. And that lasts until you finish the game, and then the game's no more fun. Whereas if you go through it without the cheat codes and actually have to find the weapons and actually are in danger of dying every so often, it's a much more rewarding experience when you make it to the end of the game, right? Mm-hmm. I would think that would be the same thing with a role-playing game.
Oh, absolutely.
For most people. So I don't know, but it sounds like, I don't mean to ascribe bad intentions to their arguments, but it sure seems like at least the examples you're giving are them trying to argue their way out of getting damage. And I don't see them saying, oh, no, the physics of this, I should probably get killed. Was there ever that argument? My guess is no. And when you're arguing about falling and the term terminal velocity comes into it, that should never result in a reduction of damage.
Yes.
If you're getting to terminal velocity, unless you're a squirrel.
Well, I mean, unless the damage would go far beyond that. It's like, okay, well, you're going to take 1 million D6 damage. Like, okay, well, maybe we should shorten that to 150 D6.
Right.
Because of terminal velocity. All right. How many hit points do you have? 14? All right. Let's do this.
Skabloosh. We sat down and figured out once how much, back when I used to play GURPS, how much it would, like a normal, like, it's like sea level, what a normal person falling at terminal velocity, how many dice of damage they would take. I don't remember what it was, like 117 dice or something like that.
Somebody did that with AD&D at one point based on their falling rules and how high you would need to fall to reach terminal velocity. They're like, yeah, level 10 character can fall from any height and survive because that's just how this game works. Right.
Well, we discovered that in 5th edition D&D when we were playing a campaign here. Because Kimmy had a character who was 8th level or 9th level. And they were on this platform and someone got a critical failure on a attack roll, like some kind of ranged attack, and I figured it blew out the sort of undercarriage of this platform she was on in this like mining area. So it all fell out, and so the platform she was on collapsed. And it says, okay, you're going to take falling damage. We figured it was like 25 feet or 50 feet. I don't remember how much it was. There was like 0 chance of her dying at all from that height. And it was, I mean, jumping 20, you're going to fuck yourself up jumping 25 feet.
Yeah, that's like 2 stories.
Yeah, I mean and 50 feet.
50 feet, you're breaking stuff.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely.
Like,
you're probably breaking stuff at 25, unless you happen to know how to roll and get it just right. Which who has that experience?
Paratroopers.
Yeah, that's about it. Yeah,
that's about it.
So
I have a friend who is a paratrooper for a long time. He's 51, decided to skateboard for the first time.
Break your hip.
Turns out he remembers exactly how to tuck and roll.
Whenever you hear 50 years old and skateboard, usually you end up hearing about a broken hip. I'm just saying. That's the only thing that stopped me from buying one. But I don't know. It just doesn't seem like they're making good faith arguments. I mean, I've had players argue, in rules, have arguments with people. And sometimes people who argue like that when you actually go in and look at the rules, a lot of times you find out that they're not reading accurately or not remembering the rules accurately. So, because I don't know why it is, but there's some players who just don't want bad things to happen to their character. Just like there are other players who revel in bad things happening to their characters. You know, the more complicated their character's situation is, the more complicated they make their own situation by their bad choices, the happier they are as players. And this is just the opposite from that. And I know you could, I mean, if you really want to try to make this not happen, which I can understand because it's frustrating, I would suggest before the game starts, talking with them and say, hey, I noticed that a lot of times that some arguments happened, and I don't know if you want to go into the factualness of the arguments, but to say, just let them know, I want the game to be immersive. I don't want it to break out into rules arguments and stuff like that. So if anyone has any questions about how things are resolved, this is something that I do a lot. We'll wait until after the game session and discuss it. You know, but we'll go with whatever my ruling is at the moment, because I'm looking to make an immersive experience, and arguing rules in the middle of a tense combat is not conducive to that.
Makes it less tense. Well, it's a different kind of tense.
Yeah, exactly right. Not the fun kind of tense.
What I would do with this person, say, okay, we've had some trouble with physics here. So, what are the physics behind a shadowy avatar of bestial rage? How do I breathe?
Right.
What happens to my cells? I mean, I haven't read any papers on this. I assume you have, because it's so important to have this kind of physics realism in this game. So I just want to know. I don't know what will happen when a shadowy avatar of bestial rage gets hit by lightning and falls off the rooftop.
Right.
So,
or if someone's iPhone goes off with a notification when you happen to be walking through them.
Exactly.
Is it going to interfere with them? Does it make you disappear?
If someone is the queen of the night, can they like command the stars? How does that happen? Like, I haven't read any peer-reviewed studies about somebody commanding the stars to fall from the sky. So, I want to know these. I'm afraid that what you're using are journals that are not well respected. So, what I'm only going to accept like arguments from nature. Let's say that's what I'm most.
Or maybe Lancet.
Yeah, exactly. So, is that okay? Can we use that as okay? Cool.
The Journal of Mechanical Physics.
There's no way. I mean, I was arguing at one point. I forget what it was, but I was like, had super gotten into guns at that point because I was like 15 or 16, and there was a movie with vampires in it, and like they didn't reload fast enough, or they didn't reload, like they fired like 14 shots or something, and I realized it's a vampire. Like, who cares? It's a vampire.
Right.
It doesn't matter. That clip could have one more bullet in. It could be like a different thing than what it looks like. But also, it's a vampire. Doesn't matter. It could have mind bullets. Like, it may never have to reload because it uses the pain and the torture of its millennia long existence to create bullets of pure hatred to destroy these people. Like, I don't know. So once there are vampires, all of your physics things are just out the window because there are no more physics because it's
right.
It's done.
Or you have to figure out what your physics are going to be, and clearly no one has done that.
Yeah. And consistency is important, right? Once you have a magical world, your magic should be consistent so it feels real.
Yeah.
Because the human brain always looks for patterns.
Mm-hmm.
And when something doesn't fit, our brain kind of, not really, sometimes we're excited about it, but it's like, that's different, that is not real, or that is wrong, or stuff like that. So, especially in a long-term game, people might have that.
Right. Or make them play a PBTA game, and then they get to decide that metals don't conduct electricity when they get a really good roll.
Only if you decide to. That's the thing with PBTA is like you never have to let the players decide what happens. You can do it all the time. It's like if you want, once in a while, you can let them do it.
Right.
So you let everybody else decide except this guy.
You know what? And I would probably have a little more respect for their arguments if their arguments were correct.
Yeah.
I mean, the whole terminal velocity thing, there's a reason people jump off buildings to try to kill themselves. And they're usually super effective.
Especially when they land on hard things, and even if there weren't sharp metal bits at the bottom of an elevator shaft, I'm pretty sure there's concrete. And falling onto concrete, turns out,
right,
doesn't go well.
No. All right, Corbin, thank you for the email, and I'd be interested to find out what happens when you actually start running your game. To see if you end up, and send us those arguments. I love when Munchkin-y players are coming up with bad arguments for why their character shouldn't take damage. You want to read the next one? Leading questions from Dirk.
Sure. Dear Jackers of Happiness, it has been a while since I last wrote in, but I have a question where I'm interested your take on it. When are leading questions okay as a tool to collaboratively create fiction? And when are they too railroady? I don't know, this fits in what we were just talking about.
Kind of, yeah.
The use of leading questions to create fiction is a part and parcel of any powered by the Apocalypse BBTA system. Direct advice to do so usually contained in the GMing section. This is not or less so with more traditional RPGs. Let's take the case of Jan Alone, a holler pilot with a shady past, in whatever your favorite traditional sci-fi system/setting. Jan Alone, I walk into the cantina. GM, you are greeted by the god-awful music of alien orchestra over the din of drunken spacers arguing over card games. As the door closes behind you, you see a bounty hunter known as Grievers, and it looks like he's been waiting for you. Who have you pissed off in the past to the extent that they would hire bounty hunters? What did you do that pissed them off? Do you think this is all too railroady? Is it unfairly dumping fiction creation on the player? Would you feel ambushed, or would you be enthusiastic to create this fiction? For bonus points, who shoots first? In my experience, when the player group is on board, this can add a lot of flavor to the characters and backstories, and more meaning to the events at hand. The alternative would be for the GM to come up with something that fits their understanding of the player's backstory, but maybe doesn't fit all that well for the player, or even have this come entirely out of the blue, which would engage the player even less. The above example depends on the player already having indicated a shady past. I don't think it would work to put the same question to the upstanding librarian, with no meddling with the criminal underworld in her past. So can we distill some criteria and hints when such leading questions are an okay tool? Use leading questions only for players to add flavor, or use them to add meaningful content that may even come back and bite them. Use leading questions only during character creation to help flesh out backgrounds or throughout the game. Is this something that you're to discuss with your players beforehand, especially when playing more traditional RPGs? What do you do when a player repeatedly notes the questions? Any other thought or advice? Keep up the good work. Cheers, Dirk. P.S. Hydrate.
No, I'm drinking
P.P.S.
water right now.
New season of Inukai. When? Please. Pretty please.
Maybe. The next thing I'm going to run is GURPS. We're going to finish. We have one or two more sessions, probably one, of Call of Cthulhu. Then I'm going to finish up my Vampire Glittering Night game. After that's done, I'm going to start a GURPS game. Because I've never run GURPS on an AP. And it's the one system I can run without looking in the rulebook. Although I'm going to have to brush up because it's been years since I've run it. And I'm going to be using 4th edition rather than 3rd. But that won't be a samurai game. That won't be an Inukai game. Because if I run that, I'm going to run that in L5R. Mm-hmm. Did they ever fix the new L5R and make it like a playable game? Or no?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay, I didn't think so. Using leading questions only for the players to add flavor, or use them to add meaningful content that may even come back and bite them.
So, I have some strong feelings about this.
Okay.
And my strong feeling is with all PBTA games, if you're going to run them, especially, but I think everybody should run or play the actual Apocalypse World first.
Mm-hmm.
Because compared to the rest of the PBTA games, especially like the second and third and fourth generations that are kind of coming out now, it's very rules light.
Right.
And there's a lot of really good. I mean, anybody who wants to GM a game should read the book because there's just stellar GMing device throughout the entire thing.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the things, like I said before, is like this is something to use judiciously. And it's to like let the players not even like so much as give to the collaborative fiction, but also just like kind of how it says here, like flesh out more of their characters. Like, what is your backstory with this person is something you can do. I would use that mostly in the session 0.
That's what I was going to say. Yeah.
And now you're fleshing out your character. We're asking all these questions
to make connections between the player characters.
Right. And also the world. Like this is a perfectly cromulent thing to do because like okay, we're now establishing your attachment to the criminal underworld.
Okay. Right.
Some of these questions are like, what did you do to piss him off? Already is more railroady than why is he waiting for you? And I think that is more important. Is why is he waiting for you? Oh, he's pissed off and wants to kill me.
Right.
Or he has information about somebody that I'm looking for. And that allows, because you already established a negative connection with the group or with this underworld. So if you're trying to do a collaborative fiction sort of scenario, it should be much more open-ended. If you've already decided that Griba is going to shoot him or her or whomever,
right?
Then that's already decided, and the reason behind it might be compelling for them to do, but that's also compelling for them not to know.
Mm-hmm.
And most players are going to want to know, are going to want to jump on that. And I think that it's much more compelling to have stuff going in the background. Because GMing in Apocalypse World, there's a lot of focus on threats and what threats are doing behind the threat moves based on what you do. So if you shoot Griba, the threat of the underworld is going to make a move to do something that will affect you and affect the group.
Mm-hmm.
And so the consequences of that are very interesting, but I think that the GM should be using their threat moves as opposed to have the player simply make stuff up at that point.
Right. Yeah, I was kind of taken aback by the fact that they was using a leading question in what looks like the meat of the game rather than in a session 0. Because a session 0, even if like you want to make connections with NPCs and stuff like that, that's a good time to do that. Mm-hmm. And also for the players to create NPCs that the GM can populate the world with as well.
Mm-hmm. If a player repeatedly nopes the questions, you're asking too many questions.
Right.
I think.
Well, I mean, if you're playing in a non PBT game, a traditional like D&D or just a traditional role playing game, this is a concept that really wasn't around then. You're not going to find a lot of rule books from the 90s that talk about leading questions, right?
Right.
So you're adding something into a game where a lot of players have a certain concept about railroadiness and about the only thing I get to control is my character, so the GM doesn't get to determine anything about my character. You maybe can veto things, but if I decide my character lived in this place and these were his parents' names, the GM doesn't get to change any of that stuff. So I think you may run into players who are going to bristle at this kind of thing, but again, if it's in a session 0, I think that's probably that's where these kind of questions belong. It seems to me. And I think if you're asking them in a session 0 and they're noping them,
and maybe they're an orphan,
right?
And they have no past, and they have amnesia.
I have no family. That guy. But I mean, I don't. Is it railroady? Yeah. I mean, even your question is like, why is the bounty hunter there? Why is he looking for you? Not necessarily shooting you. It's still making an assumption, but I mean, if you're creative, like when we talk about yes and yes but, it could be, because the question he asks is that there's this bounty hunter there. Why would someone? What would you have done to piss someone off to send a bounty hunter after you? Oh, well, I would have done this, but they wouldn't send Greedo because he and I are friends. Right. So you're saying, okay, I will accept the fact that there's a bounty hunter looking for me, but that's not this guy. This guy's maybe here to warn me, because maybe he got offered the job and turned it down. So I mean, there's ways there's plenty of ways you can twist yes-anding and turn it into something else. And I don't think that's necessarily inappropriate to do that.
I think that.
But I don't.
Question.
Go ahead.
Sorry. No, finish here.
But I don't. I just think it's weird to start putting leading questions in the actual narrative of the game once the game has started. That to me, because especially I know we've had discussions like this before. Like, I don't play very often, but when I do, I want to be immersed. I'm not GMing. I don't want to have to come up with stuff. That's your job. You're the GM, right? Which is a very traditional RPG attitude. So don't ask me questions. You tell me, and then me and my character will react to it. That's what I like doing when I'm playing.
I like that as well. It's neat to be able to do like something once in a while. But again, like, yeah, I want to play my character. I want to play like my thing. There are people like Jim who just love telling stories with other people.
Right.
And that's cool. That's your jam. If I'm playing, I want to play, and if I'm GMing, then I'm gonna go hog wild.
Right.
I kind of feel like people should think about asking the players questions in good faith, kind of like well, maybe not exactly how you're talking about before, but like these leading questions again, like you're making it seem like they're being collaborative with you, but they're really not. Like, why is he pissed off at you? Well, how much does that reason affect what's happening now? It has the ability, if you come up with a really good one, to have long-standing like repercussions. But then again, like that's the GM's job.
Right.
So it's not really either you're a GM foisting your job upon other people, which is not really in good faith, or you're having somebody make a decision that doesn't matter.
Mm-hmm.
And I think having your players make decisions that don't matter, or they matter too much and they're almost afraid to make, a bad thing because people might be mad at them or might change everything, etc. Those are a problem with open-ended questions. But yeah, I mean, I think they should be in really open-ended big questions are ones that should be early in the game to establish stuff to where you're going to go later on. One thing I like to do that I found players love doing in any system is when something dies, especially a big bad, like little goons, not that much, but like a big bad, like, you kill him, tell me how he dies.
Right.
Because again, like, that's a fun thing. They kind of get to like talk about how cool their character is, but they're not making up new stuff. They're not being a GM for you, and the character's still dying. This is not going to have like any big, huge standing repercussions on anything. They just talk about how rad their character is for a little bit, and I haven't found anybody who really hates that yet.
No, yeah, I don't know. Now, his other things here. So So we're kind of in agreement about using leading questions in Session 0 rather than throughout the game.
Mm-hmm.
I think we're in agreement with that one.
Absolutely.
To add flavor or to add meaningful content, I think personally, if you're asking those questions, it's to add content. I think that's the assumption everyone is making.
Yeah,
If I were to ask your character, whose wedding was it that you and so-and-so's character met at?
Like if we come up with it and never happens again.
Right, we're coming up with a connection. Maybe it's one of your weddings, which means one of you is either married or now separated or divorced, or you're creating an NPC, or you're establishing that another character at the table was their wedding, and you're changing things, and you're changing things in meaningful ways.
It's Chekhov's leading question.
Yeah, exactly. So meaningful content and adding flavor. I don't know. If adding flavor is, if you're talking like just superficial stuff that'll never come up, I guess. Like my dogs are howling.
Maybe the house is on fire again.
No, a siren went by, and it didn't get really loud, so that the fire engine did not stop in front of my house.
Oh, good.
Okay, is this something to discuss with your players beforehand, especially when playing in a more traditional RPG? Yes? I think...
If you really want to do it.
Right. Well, it's a great way if you have people make characters and they haven't come up with connections on their own. It's a great way to come up with connections early on, especially. Just so it's not we're going to start in a bar and you're all strangers and you're sitting at different tables and how am I going to get you all to sit at the same table? That thing.
Yeah, right. The age-old tavern. One thing you should remember here is that it is not the player's job to answer these questions, right? And like the player's job is to play their characters. It's a role-playing game, not a GM playing game.
Sure.
Right. And so if you want to discuss it beforehand with them and be like, hey, I kind of want to do this thing, and they agree to it, then right on. But I don't know. It seems I would be a little trepidatious if somebody put that much stock in it, because then it's going to happen all the time.
Right.
And I don't play role-playing games to sit around and tell campfire stories. I will totally sit down and write a bunch of fiction about stuff that I'm making up, and that's cool. Or even, write with other people, and that's totally fun, but that's not why I play role-playing games.
No. Right.
Yeah.
And there are people that do play role-playing games exactly for that.
Yeah.
It's a sort
like
of
Jim. Jim loves that.
And it's the sort of like it's kind of like the writer's table sort of way of playing a role-playing game.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was playing with Jim and Tomes this game, and there are no dice, and you just sit around and just talked about why the skeleton is doing stuff. Talked about why the skeleton is doing stuff in a dungeon for like an hour and a half, and it was fine. I had a good time hanging out with friends, but it was not satisfying. I don't find that satisfying if I am making up what's happening all the time.
Right. I mean, the game part of it for the GM is when the players throw those curveballs at you, and then you have to like really think on your feet. That to me is when it gets fun. It's also sometimes uncomfortable. It's like, oh, fuck, I didn't expect they were going to do that. Now I have to figure out how that's all going to fit in with the what's going on in my mind, as far as what's going on in the background, and I mean that's the fun part as the GM. And if you throw that stuff onto the players all the time, why are you jamming?
And yeah, like coming up with the repercussions of some weird or different thing that they've done, that's my jam.
Right.
That's how I run my games. And so telling them what are the repercussions and going with that, yeah, I feel that robs me of what's most fun for me.
Right. Now, what do you do when players repeatedly nopes the question? And Chromatic Chameleon asked just in the chat room, just asked the same thing. This is great until players flat out refuse to answer the questions. And
Stop asking questions.
Right? Yeah, you're done. I mean, there is that sort of player mindset which is not necessarily unjustified, that the more information you give the player, the harder your character's life is going to be. And there are, and sometimes not to the fun point. I remember we used to play, back when we used to play GURPS, I had one player who took a character who had the cursed disadvantage. Mm-hmm. And the cursed disadvantage was huge. It was like, I don't remember how many points you got bonus for it, but it was like 60 points. It was bad disadvantages in GURPS are like 15, right? Mm-hmm. Like unlucky might be a 15-point disadvantage. And I think with unlucky, it was like once per hour of game time, the GM does something. They had very specific words they used to describe it. Arbitrary and malicious to the character. Once per hour. So you set a timer, and it's once per hour. Something really bad is going to happen to you, right? But if you get the cursed thing, I don't even remember what all the rules were, but it was things like, if something as bad is going to happen to one of the characters, it's going to happen to the character who's cursed. If someone has a critical failure on something and someone's going to get hurt, it's going to be the cursed player. And then it's just like I had a player take it, and after a certain number of sessions, I don't remember how many it was, because I'm like, you really want to take that because you want a character who's cursed, right? Yeah, okay. So I'm just slamming on him all the time, and finally, I don't know, 2 or 3 sessions in, he's like, yeah, this is not a fun disadvantage to take. I'm like, I said, I'm really trying to be true to the rules, because you took it wanting a cursed character, and it's telling me I have to be arbitrary and malicious every 15 minutes to you, or whatever, whatever the rules said. I don't remember. And it just got to point. It was hard for me to do it. It's like you feel like you're picking on the guy, and you are. It's fate picking on the character, and you're playing fate, and I'm just not that malicious and arbitrary. So, I mean, I think I completely got way off of whatever we were talking about. Oh, if the player repeatedly nopes the thing, at some point you're going to have to say, okay, we're going to be done with this. I remember what I was talking about now. Okay, it's the mindset that the more information that you give the GM, the harder your character's time is going to be, right? Because there are GMs out there who would get a player character with this curse thing and revel in doing this session after session, hour after hour, and just constantly love doing this kind of thing. So I understand why there are players, especially older players of traditional older games, are going to be like, oh, no, I don't want a player to know who my family is, because it's like doing a podcast. Like, I don't want people to know where I work. You might fuck with me if you know where I work, or if you know where my house is, you might screw around with me. Same kind of thing. I don't want the GM to know who my parents are. You might fuck with them. But then again, you get the players who are like, no, yeah, torture my character.
I think if it's a problem for you and your GMing style that somebody isn't answering questions, you need to look real hard at your GMing style. Mm-hmm. Because it is not the player's job to GM for you.
Right.
And this is something we're going to again and again and again. So, like, if it's a problem, if it's a real problem that somebody doesn't want to answer, why is this person angry at you? I don't know. Okay, you don't know why this person is angry. Okay. Hey, what happened to your farm? I don't know. Okay, because you should be able to answer those questions. And if you are doing it just to make your job easier, you should stop doing it.
Yeah.
And you should GM your game. If you're doing it because it is fun and engaging for the players to allow them to do something extra or special with them, or again, like establish connection, establish like this world around you in a session 0, or maybe even in a session 1. That's different than making players GM for you.
Right. Now, Dirk Groove, I'm not sure I entirely agree with agree on, quote, putting the GM's job on the players, end quote, but that may be a matter of group dynamics.
If your players enjoy telling stories with each other, then that's fine. But I think that the GM should be very judicious in asking these questions of their characters.
Right.
And again, like I feel like PBTA, the concept of it, has morphed and changed over these generations of this rule set to something very different to what is in actual Apocalypse World. And again, everybody who GMs should read Apocalypse World First Edition back to back.
If you can get through.
If you're running PBTA,
if you can get through the annoying prose. I tried reading it and I'm like, this is the kind of book I'm going to throw across the room. Please use a complete sentence just once. Because they're trying to also create the tone with the language they're using in the book.
Yes.
Which
yes.
I understand that, but also if I'm trying to glean information, it's not the most effective way to give it to me, necessarily.
You like technical writing.
Yes.
I am not a technical writing kind of person.
Right.
It
reads like slam poetry sometimes.
I think it gets better once you get into like the GM session, but it's the words are specifically meant to be a little ambiguous.
Right.
Because it's supposed to be a little ambiguous in how you use it, so that you can like all of the rules in it are ambiguous.
Right.
And that's specific. But also there are things like when it talks about asking leading questions or giving the player, I think it actually says like once in a while, let the players do this.
Right.
As opposed to all the time.
Oh yeah.
So,
absolutely.
You know, that there may be groups that really, really, really love that. But I've been pulling way back from what is now like turning from being called hippie games to collaborative storytelling. I'm just like pulling back a little bit from that because I think it's going way over to an extreme.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think people are taking the stuff that they liked out of Apocalypse World and making it more that. Mm-hmm. As they make the more and more powered by the Apocalypse clones. Mm-hmm. So, all right. And someone in the chat room also brought up especially as non-native speaker, reading Apocalypse World. If English is not your first language, there's going to be things that's like, what? He said, he read the sitch.
Try to read the stuff about GMing if it's very difficult for you to read the actual rules, because the stuff like the section that is for the MC, mm-hmm. I think is where the real meat of what can help your game, as opposed to what is a sitch. Well, it's very difficult to know that's a situation, but how to approach a game and the idea of having these different threats that are reacting dynamically to what the players are doing, I find to be a great way to run a game, as opposed to coming up with a story and then having the players do it and then modifying the stories if the players do stuff. So it becomes like, instead of a straight line, becomes like this weird snake thing to maybe a different ending. I really like this concept where you create all of these bad guys, and there isn't necessarily a big bad guy, but all of these threats and places that will affect the characters, and then you let the characters bounce against them and see what happens.
Right.
And just having that, being able to grok that concept, I think can help people, even if you like writing stories and change it. Just having that concept like in your arsenal, I think makes you a better GM.
Yeah, I agree. All right. That's it. We're at the end. Any other thing you want to mention or anything? Nope. Okay. All right.
Nope.
Where is the thing? Oh, wrong one. Thank you for joining us for season 28, episode 10 of Happy Jack's RPG Podcast. My name is Stu.
This is Tappy.
And thank you to those of you who made it into the chat room. We appreciate your feedback and your comments. And we'll see you next week, Saturday at 10 a.m. Pacific Time, happyjacks.org/live. Until then, stay safe, and we will see you then. Bye.
Problem make when you no problem have you don't want to make.
The preceding program has been a presentation of the Angry Folk Media Empire.